Hello everybody, and welcome to what will now probably be my final video of all my whole top 12 albums of the decade videos, the final one. Initially, before this, a few days ago, I had recorded my video that I thought was going to be the last one I was going to release, and that was the one where I was just sort of narrowing down all of those albums that I chose off of my spreadsheet video that I thought deserved to be in the conversation. I went to the school near me here, and I recorded a video narrowing down everything. And my hope with that video was to look at all of those CDs that I had. I think I had 30 of them, and then narrow them down to the top 12. And then after that, I was going to just explain a little bit about each of those top 12 CDs in my separate 12 individual separate videos that I'm going to release, one for each of those albums of the decade. But I ended up running out of footage and not having as much time as I wanted to discuss stuff. And so what ended up happening was I rushed the ending of the video, and I had my 12 picked. And the more that I thought about it when I was looking at it over the last few days, my list of my top 12, there's still 2 or 3 that I think need to be considered more. And so the purpose of this video is to go through this stack of CDs here, which is all of the ones that the 12 that I had determined deserved to be in it and were going to be in my top 12. And then it is, I think, 2 extra. So let's just go through them right off the bat here. If you haven't watched any of my other videos, please go back and do so. At this point, I've uploaded, I don't even know how many. Like I said, I think this is going to be the last one because this is where I'm going to go through and discuss this. I wasn't really planning on filming this video like this, but I had an opportunity to do it. So I'm just filming it here in my room where I've got all my CDs. I have a shelf like this. I have another shelf this big across the room. I have a smaller shelf over here, which you can see a little bit of. I have another shelf over there. These 2 shelves are half the size of this one, and then I have a ton of them up here on this shelf. But anyway, I just decided on the spur of the moment, let's do this, let's discuss it, let's see what's going to happen. So I hope the lighting in here is okay. I've got natural light mixed with a light bulb, which I am not too thrilled about, but it seems to be pretty even from where I'm looking. But anyway, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. So let's go through these albums. We have, I have my list here. I have Maximum, hold on a sec. We have Gin Wigmore, Gravel and Wine, Mook, Miyaku Haku, Hertz, Exile, The Pierces, Creation, Kaiser's Orchestra, Violetta Violetta Volume 3, These Hopeful Machines by BT, Jacob Dylan, Women in Country, Pendulum's album Immersion, Janov, Martistan and Arlene, Globus, Break from This World, and One, Trilogy, and Maximum the Hormone, Yoshu Fukushu. So I believe those are the 12 albums that I had chosen in the narrowing down video. Let me just count. 12, yes. 12 individual albums that I thought deserved to be on my top 12 albums of the decade list. However, the more that I was thinking about it, the more I was looking at it and debating, one of the things that kept coming back to me was this album. This is Evanescence's most recent album, Synthesis. Now, this is their sort of greatest hits album, but with just an orchestra and then electronic elements for like drums and some little bleepy bloopy things, and then some bass, synth bass, and then just her vocals. And this album is such a special album, and it's so incredible that I keep thinking that it deserves to be on the list. Now, I also have the album Looking Skyward by Mesh here. And in my last video, I was talking about how in their career, Mesh has released 2 perfect albums, in my opinion. This is one of them. However, out of the 2, the one that I like even more than this is actually, while I'm sitting here, I can show you, A Perfect Solution. This came out in 2009. So thank goodness it did, and I don't have to even consider it to be on this list. However, if this were included was, I guess, eligible to be in my top 12 of the decade, I would choose this over this, and this album would be in this top 12, and I would have to take something out. Now, my problem is, in my head, because this album is better than this one, there's already a tiny bit of a negative connotation with this album, even though this album should have no relevancy to our conversation. I listened to this album just the other day, all the way through, and it is perfect. It's a perfect album. I think that it doesn't get samey. It doesn't get boring. Every song is fascinating. Every song is interesting. Sonically, they all sound very similar. However, I think that I guess my main problem is just that I am having trouble deciding whether or not I think these 2 albums should be on the list. The Evanescence one and the Mesh one. And so what I'm going to try to do in this video is decide, first of all, whether or not those albums should be included on the list. And then if I do think they should, which albums should be taken off. And that's going to be very hard for me. And then I think I'm going to go through and actually organize the list. So we'll have to just see what happens. And do it. So, right off the bat, And One Trilogy. This is a fantastic band. I mentioned it in all these other videos. I love And One, and they released 3 albums in this past decade, all 3 of which I think are almost perfect albums. And I actually like, as an individual album, those other 2 albums they released this decade more. However, this album is a triple album. It was only released, as far as I know, as a triple album. This folds out and is 3 discs with 3 books, each, individually colored. It's a little busted. 3 albums, 3 colors, 3 individual discs. Each one is its own sort of feeling album. They're all the sort of electronic synth pop 80s kind of throwback music that And One is known for, but it's a triple album, and I love almost all the songs on the whole thing. There's 30 songs. Each disc has 10 songs on it. And like I said, they're each their own sort of style. One is more sort of industrial electronic German metal, or German industrial music. One of them is more sort of Depeche Mode-y sounding kind of electronic rock music. And each song on that album has a real guitar in it, I believe, someone playing electric guitar. And then there's one that's sort of more poppy, fun stuff, like like Keep Feeling Fascination, or stuff like that. A lot of the songs have female vocals and stuff mixed with the lead vocalist's vocals. I love it, and I think it's great, and I think it deserves to be on the list. This is not even in the contention to be taken off. Globus, Break From This World. I shouldn't have worn a black shirt, I see now. Globus, Break From This World is not in the contention to be taken off. I think that's top 5. Janov is not. Pendulum's not. Jacob Dylan is not. BT is not. Kai's Orchestra is not. The Pierce's Creation, this one is maybe. Exile Hurts, maybe. Mook, maybe. Gin Wigmore, maybe. Maximum the Hormone, no. So we've got 2 albums that I think maybe deserve to be on the list. 3 that I definitely think deserve to be on the list, but I am questioning whether or not I should have picked them now. So I think maybe what we should do is start at number 1 and work our way backwards. Find the 2 that I think deserve it least, and then decide whether or not I think these should be in there or not. So I've got my list here. We have Maximum the Hormone that I definitely... Okay, so I'm going to just kind of separate these into halves. What I think belongs in the top 6, and then what I think belongs in the top... Okay. So we've got Maximum the Hormone, Janov, Globus, Kaiser's Orchestra, Pendulum, BT, and 1. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 7 albums that I think are 100%, no doubt in my mind, top 12 album material of the decade. So maybe I should order those, and then I can think of the other 4, or I guess the other 5. Yeah, 5 albums. Yeah, these right here. Hold on a second. Jacob Dylan. Okay. And actually... No. Yeah. Let's set these aside for right now. And we'll set these aside as well. And let's focus on these. So Kaiser's Orchestra, Violetta Violetta Trilogy, Volume 3. If they released the whole trilogy as a set, it would be number 1, to me without question. However, they never did that. So each of these 3 albums, Violetta Violetta Volume 1, Volume 2, and Volume 3, are all individual albums, and I'm treating them as such. I love all 3 of their albums, and the other 2 were close to being on here, but as I explained in a video previously, I don't think that any band deserves being on the list twice. I think in my head, because I can so easily differentiate a band's albums within each other and say which one is better than another one, then I think that I take the one that I think is best, and I like to I'm going to put it against the other albums that I think are best. And I know that might be a little complicated, but it is what it is. But Violetta Violetta Volume 3, this is the last album that Kaiser's Orchestra released as a band. Janov then went out and made this album as a solo artist. And so Volume 3 is a special album in the annals of music history because it is the only album I've ever heard that is a whole album of songs that sound like James Bond theme songs. Every album is written like every song is written like Kaiser's Orchestra's previous albums, or all the songs on their previous albums, which is just guitar, drum, bass, vocals for the most part, and then some piano or organ. Kaiser's organ is why they call the band Kaiser's Orchestra. They use a Kaiser's organ a lot. Pump organ. So what makes that album special, though, is that in addition to those elements, which are found on most of the other Kaiser's Orchestra songs, the whole album is mixed in such a way that there is an orchestra as basically the 6th member of the band. And every song features an orchestra as an actual instrument, as an actual piece. A lot of bands that will record with an orchestra, they write a rock song or they make a ballad or something, and you could take the orchestra out of it and still have the foundations of a song that would work without the orchestra. However, this album, if you took the orchestra and the orchestral elements out of it, it would not be an album anymore. The songs wouldn't be songs. There are long breaks where it's just the orchestra, and there's moments in the songs when the orchestra is the driving force. It's not always just drums, bass, guitar, piano. It is the orchestra as well. It is a legitimate and integral part and piece of this album. And that's true for every song. There are 10 songs. All 10 songs are epic and incredible. Some of them are bombastic, and some of them are more intimate. And the last song on the album does something that I love so much. I wish more bands would do it. It is sort of a reprisal of, I think, 3 or 4 of the songs that appear earlier on in the album. There's a bit of a melody from one of the songs, and then it is the lyrics and the chorus of, I believe, one of the first few tracks on the album, and it is just slow, and it's almost like a play on themes and variations. And I love that. It's awesome. I don't know if it would work with every pop album or rock album, but in this case, with the orchestra, it does work so beautifully. It's executed so well. It's incredible. I think that the album is amazing, and for a long time, it was my number one favorite album. Favorite. I say favorite, not best, not top, which is one of the things that I'm not even going to discuss, the difference between favorite, top, best, whatever. For a long time, this was my favorite album. But then, after they broke up, 3 years later, Yanov released this album, and it is now my favorite individual album. Every song is perfect. I think there are 15 songs on here, all full-length songs, no intros or anything like that. Every song is unique, individual. They all sound incredible. The drums are awesome. Everything about it is awesome. Every single aspect is awesome. This is probably the most perfect album I've ever heard. However, it's missing that orchestral element. It's missing that extra thing to really push it and make it special. I think the songs are better written on this album, but that I think is because it's tailored more towards my personal, subjective view of what I want music to be. Each song has a third chorus. Each song has a bridge. The structure of the songs is what I want. None of the songs fade out, I don't think. There's surprises. There's musical sprinkles. All of that is also somewhat true for this album. The structure of the songs is a bit more complicated because of the orchestral length of the songs and things like that. And a few of the songs have solo sections, instrumental sections, things like that. Neither of these two albums have a song that disappoints me at all. But as I'm sitting here talking, thinking about it, because I am trying to think of this objectively as well as subjectively, the orchestral element is something that is so super important to me, very impressive to me. I think an album that is recorded with an orchestra with orchestral elements is something that makes it a little bit more impressive. I'm not saying necessarily better, but it makes it more impressive. Having worked at a recording studio, having gone through the process of recording an album without strings or anything like that, but then also going to an orchestra and recording an orchestra performing live, which is something that we also did at the studio I worked at quite often. It was one of the things we were known for, was making live recordings of an orchestra or choir. Knowing how much work goes into that and how many individual pieces of an enormous puzzle have to fit together just right in order to make something that works is just so impressive and such a daunting task. And I have a lot of albums that have orchestral elements added to rock music, ballad music, whatever. I have a whole shelf here of symphonic metal, and that's the whole foundation of that genre, is to mix rock, metal, heavy elements with soaring female vocals, classical style a lot of the time, and then also this orchestral element. And it's so hard. And every one of these albums is mixed differently. They sound differently sonically because everyone has to come together, not come together. Every individual editor, recording artist, artist. Okay, hold on. Getting a little heated here. Basically what I'm saying is that it's very hard to record an orchestra and have that sound as good as the rest of the band, have it work in well with it. And I think that this is the most perfect example of that I've ever heard. I think that there's no disparate feeling between the members of the band and the orchestra. It is a very incredible union of those two elements together to make something that's incredible. Now, the more I'm talking about it, the more I am definitely sure that I would place this album over this album. So we know that now. So now we have to talk about the one other album that uses this same premise of an orchestra with a band, a rock band. Now, this Globus album, there's 12 songs on it, each one an individual song, no outro, so 12 full-length songs. Some longer, some shorter, some somewhat little longer pop length, but most of them are pretty long, 5-6 minutes. The songs on this album range between 10 minutes-ish to 5 minutes. Mostly, I think they're between the 6 and 8 minute range. This album, as I've explained before in these videos, I think I'll just do a brief record label in Europe who specialized in making trailer music or orchestral scores gave a bunch of, I don't know how much. They hired a guy, a composer, to write pop songs and rock songs and to use orchestral elements that they had already recorded and fuse it all together. They did that and recorded an album that is called Epicon by Globus. Extremely hard to find a physical copy of that album. However, that was in the last decade. But in the 2010s, in 2011, this album was released, and it is their second album that they recorded that way, but instead of recording it with already previously recorded elements, symphonic elements, they wrote all the music, wrote all the songs, and then they recorded everything, including the orchestra and everything for it. Everything is custom for these songs. And so that gives it a bit of extra sauce to it, that everything was made for that, rather than taking already existing elements and creating songs out of it. Some of the songs on here are not perfect, but when the songs on here hit, when there are 12 songs, and I would say 6 of them are like out of this world, incredible, amazing. 6 of the most amazing songs I've ever heard in different styles. One of those 6 songs is a slow ballad song that's just so heart-wrenchingly sad and so introspective in terms of the way it makes you feel. It's I believe it's sort of opaquely about cancer, having cancer and slowly sort of like becoming apart, I guess. Slowly becoming, I guess, more transparent, or feeling like you're becoming more transparent. Very long song, very epic, builds with the strings, so much amazing tension, and just incredible. And then the release of tension is so gratifying and amazing. And I think that song in itself is worth being in the top 12. But then you have the song, that's the song Terminal, if you would like to look it up yourself. But then they also have a song, one of those other 6 tracks is called Manuela. And that is just an acoustic guitar and a guy singing, sort of flamenco style, playing the guitar and then singing, all in English. And it builds to have some strings and stuff, but for the most part, it's just an acoustic guitar and man singing. It's incredible, amazing. They go back to the chorus a 3rd time. I love it. It's incredible. The other 4 songs that are impressive to me on this album are just bombastic rock songs that build, and they have these. The thing that makes this album special is the people who wrote the orchestral elements of it. They know how to play and tug at your heartstrings. They know the progressions of chords to use to make you feel a specific emotion. And I can't exactly say that for this album. This album, they had the elements, the orchestral elements that fit with the songs, and it was an integral part, but it didn't take the songs to that higher level emotionally. It took them to the higher level musically and technically, but emotionally, the emotional highs on this album are maybe the highest emotional highs I've ever heard on any album ever. There's a few songs, however, that I think are a little boring, and they don't exactly do what I want them to do, but those songs I can understand why they're on the album, because they are the songs that I think people wanted and expected from this band. Generally, the songs I like are ones that start a little quieter and then build to this bombastic, crazy climax that really leaves you feeling satisfied after the song's over and almost exhausted and drained. Just like you got to take a breath after the song. And the album is mixed in such a way that it goes from a song like that to a song that's a little bit more down tempo. Like it doesn't just hit you and keep hitting you and keep the intensity there. This album has waves and waves of emotion and waves of intensity, and then waves of it'll be very intense and then it'll come down and be very intimate and very close sounding. And that's what's so impressive about it. Now, at the same time, as far as I know, this Globus has only ever released 2 albums, those 2 I just mentioned. Kaiser's Orchestra is a band. They've been recording for a whole decade or more before their last album came out. And they have other albums that you can go out there and enjoy. They're different styles, but they all have the same sort of general feeling of this, the same vocals. I guess I should mention this album for the most part is in English, though there is also, I believe, some Hindi, there is some French, there's some Spanish. Mostly it's English though. This album, and that's another thing I should say, there's like 3 or 4 different like lead vocalists on this album, so it kind of rotates song to song to song to song who's singing the lead vocal, which gives it a very amazing feeling of like being a movie score with drums and rock elements and vocals. Like it's just, again, there's no albums really like these 2 albums out there that I've heard. And this album is all in Norwegian. Every song that Kaiser's Orchestra has ever released is in Norwegian, and the same thing can be said for this Janov album. Now, to me, that's not a factor. I do not care if a song is in a language that I understand or not, because I actually prefer music that's in another language, because as I've said a million times, it frees you from the burden of having to relate to the lyrics. You don't have to try to feel something deeply, you don't have to try to feel deeply connected to the lyrics. You can just feel deeply connected to the music, and that's the way I connect to music personally. So as I'm sitting here, as I've been discussing all of this, I still cannot decide. Basically, what I'm trying to decide right now is what's my number 1. What is my number 1 album of the decade? And I'm trying to decide between these 2 albums. And it is very hard. But I think at the end of I will say before I say this, I think that the highs on this are the highest the highest highs I've ever experienced on any album. So the highs on this album are better and reach a higher peak of emotion, of connection, of any aspect of music you can think of. They are better and higher than the peaks on this album, but this album is a bit more consistent. Both albums are tough to listen to all the way through because there's just so much. And if you're listening to it intently, you are putting so much of yourself into them that it's hard to listen to them both all the way through. I think that I'm going to save that discussion. These are the top 2. And I'm going to save that discussion. So now we're thinking 3 and 4. I'm not really using this, so I guess we don't need it. So we have the top 2 narrowed down. So then we're going to need 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, as I look at these albums here, I have Janov, BT, Pendulum, Maximum the Hormone, and One. Of these 5 albums, I think, and now this is, again, we're talking top 7 of the decade. Albums that I absolutely love. But I think of these albums, the weakest is And One. Kind of for reasons that I've mentioned already. I think that this album is really impressive. And this is a case of quantity definitely is the reason this is here. I mean, the songs are of a really high quality, and I enjoy them. but the quantity is what makes this so impressive. It's 30 incredible songs. Or, well, I should say, probably I would say maybe 15 good songs, then 5 great songs, and then 10 incredible songs. And that's just as many incredible songs as a full album, for the most part. But I'm going to say this, of these 5 albums, this is the least impressive of these 5. So, And One is going to be number 7. Okay, now we get my list here. So, And One is going to be number 7. Let's take this and put this one aside. Bring it out again if we need to. Now, as I look at this, I've already talked a little bit about Zhianov's album. I'm going to make Yanov number 3. I'm going to make Maximum the Hormone number 6. So now we have 2 albums that I want to discuss. So we are looking at this for my 4th and 5th spots. Pendulum, Immersion, BT, These Hopeful Machines. 2 albums that came out in the same year, 2010. Absolutely incredible. So in that year, I had Pendulum as my number 1 album for the year, and BT, These Hopeful Machines, as my second. And I am going to lean that way this time as well. So let's talk about them a little bit. Pendulum, this is one of the first albums I ever heard that absolutely, blew my mind. Electronic music, drum and bass based, but with a lot of electronic elements. I think this album was the first time I heard something that I would later consider to be dubstep music, but it is not, like Excision or anything like that. That's like modern, like dubstep, and what dubstep sort of turned into. There's 15 full-length tracks on this album. The mixing on this album is not perfect. However, it's what it needs to be for this to be maximum impact. I think the beautiful moments on this album really stand out because a lot of the album is more intense drum beats over melodic stuff. I think the guitars are a little disappointing on some songs, but then you have what I consider to be the number 1 song of the decade, and in my opinion, the most special song I've ever heard, I think, ever, which is Self vs. Self, an electronic artist featuring a metal band. So it is a metal band performing, but with electronic drums and electronic elements. And it features both lead vocals from Rob Swire, the guy who basically does everything in Pendulum, and then Anders Frieden, the guy who sings for In Flames. And that one song is just incredible. This album is hard for me to listen to all the way through for the same reason I mentioned to the Globus and the Kaisers Orchestra. It absolutely is hard to listen to all the way through because you're putting so much of yourself into it as you're listening. And it's almost exhausting to listen to. It's almost too much. And I say that knowing that I would never say that about an album. But it is almost too much. BT, however, also almost too much. This album, BT, an electronic artist, for a long time someone I considered to be a musical genius, and I do still think that, except I think that he has reached a point where he's doing things now that are above my head, and so it's harder for me to enjoy it. But at this time, this is the culmination, the peak of his career, in my opinion. The songs are all so long and so put together from song to song. Some of them are sort of dancey, four to the floor songs. They're all poppy feeling. The analog elements to this album really stand out. The acoustic guitar, the real drums. BT has a degree in music from Juilliard School of Music in vocals, singing, in piano, and drums. So, my gosh, the things that he can create being Juilliard level master in those things, then include on there his proficiency in basically everything else, including orchestration, which he does movie scores. The way that he crafts a song, when he wants to sit down and craft a song that is structured normal, like a normal song, even though the parts are stretched out, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. When he wants to do that, he does it better than anybody. The emotions are there, like they are in the Globus album. He can put chords together in such a way that it makes you feel something. All of that is just so incredible that one man can helm songs that do that. It feels like it was a combination of people coming together. However, mostly just him, and then the guest artists that he asked to perform on some of his stuff. And that's one thing that's cool on this album. There are two. This is actually a double album because he couldn't fit all 14 songs. Wait, hold on. Yeah, all 14 songs. No, I'm sorry, all 12 songs on one disc, which he actually did later and released it as a separate album that I have. Doesn't matter. So each song on this album is between like 5 and 7 minutes long, I think. Maybe even some getting up to 8. And I think there's one song that gets close to 10, and that's the sort of just electronic dance song. But each of these two albums on here, there's one song that's an instrumental song. There's, I think, 2 songs that are sung lead vocals by a person who's other than BT. There's 2 songs that are sung by BT himself, and then a third song that might be instrumental as well, but is kind of a combination of all of those things. The highs are extremely high. There's almost no lows. The mixing is incredible. It's one of the most dynamic albums I've ever heard. I'm talking myself out of what I was thinking. I was thinking Pendulum would be number 4 and BT would be number 5. However, I'm not going to do that. BT is number 5. Or I'm sorry, BT is number 4. So we're making BT number 4. Pendulum is number 5. Okay. So now we have these albums. Jakob Dylan, Gin Wigmore, Mook, Hertz, Pierce's. Of these albums, which one do I think is the weakest? See, and I still have this Evanescence album and this Mesh album that I think belong. If I was doing top 14, boom, it'd be so easy. But I've done a decade of top 12s and I can't break that now. I think that the Pierce's album and the Hertz album, these are both deluxe editions that feature bonus songs. I think this is a deluxe edition. Well, there's 14 tracks on here, and there are 16 tracks on here, all full-length songs. All great. All amazing. So the lengths of these are better than the lengths of these albums. Gin Wigmore, one of the things that really stands out to me on all of these albums to a degree, but specifically with this Gin Wigmore album, Gravel and Wine, is that it truly feels like the perfect combination of people came together to make something that only those people could make at only that particular time with those particular tools and have it be like this. Obviously, the same can be said for all of this, but Gin Wigmore really, truly does feel like the fates came together and allowed this album to sound the way that it does. There's only 11 songs on it, and then a bonus track from her previous album. Of the 11 songs, I think there's 1, maybe 2, that I don't particularly care for. The other 9 or so are just the height of what this music is. which it's hard to explain, but it's gritty female. Jen Wigmore has a very gravelly, sort of gritty voice. And some of her albums feel more poppy. This album is what pop music kind of was in the 50s. So it's rock and roll influenced, but it's also influenced by things like Nancy Sinatra, who's someone that I also really love, but things like that. Every song has the same sonic palette, same sonic textures, but they're being used in different ways. There's a lot of twangy guitar with like tremolo guitar with lots of like spring reverb on it. There's guitar solos. Her vocals, the background vocals are one of the things that make this album so special. They are female gang vocal backing vocals, or male gang vocal backing vocals a lot. And they're like, huh, ha, like stuff like that, that like out of context sounds ridiculous. But when you listen to the album, you're like, this feels like something I've never heard, but at the same time, it feels so familiar to you while you're listening to it that it's like a throwback, but they would have never made songs like this back in the day. But it sounds like it's throwback. However, there's one or two songs that are disappointing. To balance that out, there's the song on their track 8, Happily Ever After, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. So it kind of balances itself out. Now, along those same lines, well, no, that'd be late. I'm not even going to go into that right now. Like I said, these two albums are impressively written songs. They are impressively performed songs, impressively recorded songs. The production is great on both of these albums. And this album sonically even does remind me a little bit of, this is the Pierce's creation, does remind me a little bit sonically of this album. I think that the individual elements that were used on Jen Wigmore's Gravel and Wine make it a little bit more special. I have heard other albums that sound similar to the Pierce's album, including the most recent Pierce's album before this album. And I think that the uniqueness of this Jen Wigmore album helps separate it in that regard. But this album, the Pierce's album, is almost twice the length. Maybe not twice the length. It's for sure at least a third of the length longer. And its consistency stays the same throughout. It is completely consistent. There are no bad songs on that album. And so I think for that reason, I would say this album is better than this album. But then we look at something like Jakob Dylan, which is, in my opinion, the height of T-Bone Burnett's production, and the reason that I like this album so much. It really is incredible. See, I'm having trouble because the Evanescence album. Okay, I think these three albums are the strongest of these five. So what we have left is Mook Miyaku Haku. And we have... Oh, son of a gun, it's tough. Right now, I'm kind of fighting with myself. Do I think this Evanescence album is better than this Jakob Dylan album, which is mostly sort of Americana-style music? There's 11 songs. There's 16 tracks on the Evanescence album, but some of them are intros. Some of them actually aren't even listed. They're songs that existed before in different styles. See, when I look at the Jen Wigmore album, or at the Jakob Dylan album, nothing but the whole wide world to give, nothing, and then down on our own shield. Got to lend a hand. We don't live here. Everybody's hurting. Yonder come, yonder come, yonder come the blues. Holy rollers for love. See, this album to me is so much more impressive than this album because of the strings, the added elements like that. All right, I'm going to go. Gin Wigmore is number 10. The Pierces are number 9. And Hertz is number 8. This is very hard for me. So I'm debating these 4 albums. And I know it's silly because I already chose this album and Mook. Mook, 14 tracks, all of them good. But Mook is such a consistent band. I think this is their best album, but they have albums that are close to being this good. Yeah, I'm going to say Mook is better than... Okay. E. Mesh is out. Mook is Japanese. Evanescence's album is a greatest hits but re-recorded. However, it's the type of album I have always wanted. I have always wanted someone to make an album that's just basically orchestra. And when I say orchestra in the case of Evanescence, I don't know if any of the songs have brass, maybe 1 or 2 instruments to help fill. But for the most part, it's just a string section, and not even a huge one, but a string section. And then there are some woodwinds in a few of the songs. You can hear flutes and some oboe and things like that. But then the rest of the elements of the songs are electronic, trip-hop sounding, which was always the coolest part of the previous Evanescence albums, in my opinion. Their second album is very trip-hop feeling, and then the choruses have heavy guitars and stuff. And I always thought while I was listening to it, this would be so much cooler without the guitars. However, I like metal and I like rock music, and so I enjoy that also for what it is. So the fact that that's the type of album that I have always wanted, and it came out and is there, I have to eliminate one of these. My favorite song of all time, or at least right now, my absolute favorite number 1 song, is Killer from the Mook album. The thing that's different about this, for me, is that the Jakob Dylan album is more about the songwriting and about the production, but the production is not special. All T-Bone Burnett albums sound like that. Very bass heavy, very curved, very rounded. Everything sounds like it has a nice roundness to it. But there's background vocals. It almost reminds me of the Leonard Cohen album in the way that the female backing vocals come in. And I love Leonard Cohen's music. And the production is more what I wish Leonard Cohen's music would be. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I think the songs are very well written. I like Jakob Dylan a lot. I think this album is far better than anything he did with the Wallflowers. But the Mook album is special to me because it's more the style that I like. It's more what I generally tend to lean towards. But however, if I were recommending music to someone, anyone watching this, I would absolutely, whoever you are, recommend that you listen to the Jakob Dylan album. I would not recommend the Mook album to almost anybody. Mook is one of my favorite bands because they speak to me musically on a level that almost no other band does. They're not afraid to do things that I wish more bands would do. Be more poppy, not be afraid to look foolish or silly while they're making a song. And I don't mean like physically looking silly, but like they do things that are just silly. And it's not like a lot of Japanese metal music tends to be like gimmicky silly. That's not what Mook does. At this point, I think that I have determined that the Evanescence album is number 11. Which means part of me wants to say Jacob Dylan because I think it makes my list look better having more variety on it. Now, that's a terrible reason to include anything. And that's a terrible reason. But it's way more accessible. And truth be told, I've listened to the Mook album a lot more recently. So I did try to listen to the Jacob Dylan album just the other day, knowing that I was thinking about this. But I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing. Obviously, every song that I listened to I loved, and I only got through the first 7 or so. And now that I look at the songs like I was doing earlier, I can sing the chorus of all the songs up to 8. And 8, 9, 10, and 11, I don't recall. And that gets me excited right now to just go back and listen to those songs because there's probably 4 songs that I'm not as familiar with because usually when I would start, I'd start from the beginning, boom, shakalaka, listen through, fall asleep, or get disinterested by song 8. Whereas with Mook, the 14 tracks are all good. And I know, I can't sing it because it's Japanese, but I know all the songs on there. But some of them aren't perfect. No. Now that I've had some time to think about it, Kaiser's Orchestra, number 1. Globus, number 2. Now we're back here to this. At the moment, I am leaning towards Jacob Dylan. It's hard because I like the Mook album more. However, it's less impressive to me because their other albums are just as impressive. And there's a few songs on it that while each Mook album has songs on it that disappoint me a little bit, I think that it's such a strong album. Take it for a sec. Either of you, Mom, prefer to guess? Oh. I don't know. Number 12 is Mook. Okay, so I have my list. Whoops. So I have my list. I'll read it to you, although hopefully you've watched the video already. Number 12, Mook. Number 11, Evanescence. Number 12, Mook, Miyaku Haku. Number 11, Essence Evanescence Synthesis. Number 10, Gin, Wigmore, Gravel, and Wine. Number 9, Pierce's Creation. Number 8, Hertz Exile. Number 7, And One Trilogy. Number 6, Maximum the Hormone. Yoshu Fukushu. Number 5, Pendulum Immersion. Number 4, BT, These Hopeful Machines. Number 3, Yanov, Artistin and Marlene. Number 2, Globus, Break from This World. And my number 1 album of the decade, Kaiser's Orchestra, Violetta Violetta Trilogy, Volume 3. There you go. So, I recorded this before recording all those other videos, so I recorded this just after doing my artwork video, and before hopefully starting the top 12 albums of the decade individual videos. So, like I said, this should be the last video I post about this. Thank you very much for watching any of these videos. It was really fun for me to do this, and I appreciate when anybody watches my stuff, whether it's for a few minutes. I know it's all very long, but whatever. Sometimes I think I do these more for myself to look at in later years, but if anyone else gets some enjoyment out of them, know that I really appreciate that a lot. So thank you very much, and let's hope that the next decade is just as good, if not better, than the decade we just had. I've been saying that for years. The best music of all time, I firmly believe, is being created right now, and I just don't know about it yet. So, with that in mind, go listen to some music. Thank you very much.